When the spirits arrived, they did so in the full light of day. They did not wait for darkness to fall to coyly rattle doorknobs and surreptitiously rearrange items in the drawing room. Rather, they strode boldly up the walkway under the bright midday sun, threw open the doors and roamed through the vacant rooms, filling the dusty, rarely used spaces with chatter and laughter. I was groggy and slightly disoriented when they arrived. I had been deep in sleep, lying on a carpet of thick moss under the shade of the old oak tree. The moss crept up to and over the side of the well, speckling its gray stones with flecks of green. I could feel the cool air coming off the moist rocks, the chill rising from the dark water many feet below palpable despite the warmth of the early summer day. I shuddered. I'd been woken up from a nightmare, one that I was already forgetting, but that left behind fading images of horror, darkness, and pain. I was at first nonplussed by the appearance of these spirits, and their boldness in walking into my house as if they owned it. I did not yet realize that these visitors were spectral beings from another world as I now suspect they are, and instead thought they were merely particularly brazen guests who had arrived unannounced and uninvited. Pulling myself together, feeling the lingering emotions of dread and horror from my dimly remembered dream cling to me like the tendrils of a spiderweb encountered unexpectedly on a path, I put on my best smile and walked over to greet the visitors. Somewhat to my disquiet, I realized my guests had not been content to wait at the door to be greeted, but had instead let themselves in and were taking stock of the house as if it were their own. There were 2 adults, a married couple I estimated, and their 2 young children. Their dress was exceedingly odd, bright, colorful, and of an unfamiliar cut and style that did not look familiar to me even from within the pages of the avant-garde French fashion magazines that Emma so enjoyed to mock. "Ah. Hello," I said, sticking out a hand in greeting, thrown slightly off-kilter by the peculiarity of the situation. "I am Charles Thornton, owner of this house. I'm most happy to have you as guests in my home. May I inquire as to your business here?" My half-hearted attempt at an ingratiating smile collapsed when the strange couple simply strode past me without a second glance. Beginning to feel somewhat irritated at their impertinence, I briskly strode to stand in front of them. By now they had crossed the entire foyer and were standing at the foot of the grand staircase that descended into the middle of the ballroom. Stepping up onto the first stair to give myself what I hoped was an imposing position above the strange visitors, I tried again. "Excuse me, sir and madam, I'd be more than happy to entertain you as guests, but I must insist that you first explain your presence here." I could hear the hoots and shouts from the 2 children echoing through the empty rooms as they raced about, radiating the excitement of young children with new places to explore. The boy came flying around the corner of the drawing room, his odd footwear squeaking over the hardwood floor. "Slow down," I shouted, "watch out for the dash." I paused. I had been intending to tell the young boy to watch out for the Ming vase that was stationed at the corner between the drawing room and ballroom. It was Emma's favorite decoration and I worried the boy would knock it over. But it was no longer there. When had we removed it? I didn't remember. In fact, looking around I realized that most of the furniture had been removed and what remained was shrouded in thick white sheets and covered with a fine layer of dust. Had I forgotten, perhaps, that Emma had been seized by one of her manic determinations to reorder our life and directed everything removed in order to install newer and more fantastical designs? Her frenzied belief that everything could always be improved upon, and the reckless abandon with which she began new projects had always inspired both amazement and trepidation in me. I, who could spend hours choosing between nearly identical outfits to wear to a party, could only admire the way she would upend her life without hesitation, confident that whatever that followed could only be better and brighter. I was happy that Penelope seemed to take more after her mother than her father in this regard, and approached the world with same determined fearlessness, like a conquistador striding onto the sands of an unexplored land. I realized that the young couple had not reacted to my demand. In fact, they appeared to take no notice of me at all, staring past me up the curving sweep of the staircase with twin looks of amazement on their faces. "Pinch me, Ashley," said the man, still staring around in wonder and grinning. "Is this real?" Ashley obliged, perhaps a bit too enthusiastically, because he jerked in surprise, and turned to her in mock anger, and began tickling her furiously, eliciting gales of laughter. "Stop it, Jason. Stop it. Seriously, I'm going to pee myself if you don't." He ceased, and they held each other contentedly for a moment. She brushed the hair back from his forehead and asked in a low tone, "So, what do you think, Mr. New York Times bestseller? Will you be able to write another smash hit in this place?" "Yes, it's certainly got the right atmosphere," he said. "Stately house, tragic past, it practically writes itself." "And a crop of unsuspecting new homeowners fated to be torn apart by horror?" she asked, her tone serious but her eyes sparkling mischievously. He lifted her hand up to his lips and kissed it. "Well, that's where the fiction part comes in, honey." They laughed together and, arm in arm, made to ascend the stairs. At this point, entirely unsure how to restore this encounter into one which I could understand, I said, in a somewhat faltering voice, "Excuse me. If I could just interrupt dash." But the couple continued to take no notice and walked past me. Actually, they walked through me, passing by as if I was no more an obstacle than smoke. The woman, Ashley, gave a slight shiver as if experiencing a draft, but otherwise they betrayed no reaction. This was when I realized my visitors were no ordinary beings, but incorporeal in some way. Specters, ghosts, spirits, some beings from another dimension. My first and immediate reaction was sheer joy. I couldn't wait to tell Emma I was right. I believed that Emma was more beautiful than the sunrise, so perfect that the words of our best poets seemed tawdry and inadequate to do her justice. But my favorite thing about my Emma was her intellect. We spent many days in quiet contemplation, stretched out in the gazebo by the water, reading the latest scientific treatises from Europe and debating the leading theories of the day. She had been teaching Penelope the same love of knowledge and inquiry, and watching them pose together over an open book, a matching expression of furious concentration on their faces, or seeing Penelope's eyes widen in amazement as she looked through a telescope at the stars would fill my heart with a love so intense it felt almost painful. When we had turned our attention to the work of a certain Charles Robert Darwin, she had accepted the inevitable conclusions of his work effortlessly, shedding her theological beliefs easily as if they were clothes worn lightly that had been long outgrown. She donned the mantle of rationalism and scientific materialism, the belief that all phenomenon could be explained by natural causes, with eagerness, as if finally stepping into an outfit that had been tailored for her. I gave up my belief in the supernatural unwillingly, as if reluctantly releasing a worn and faded outfit, one outgrown, but nevertheless still comfortable. I had never been dogmatic in my Christianity, and I suspect that Emma had begun to view it with benign derision long ago, but the belief in a higher power, in events and phenomena beyond our human ability to understand, seized my imagination and held me fast. The harsh doctrine of Darwinism and scientific rationality never sat comfortably with me, and, while I was forced to accept its superior capacity to explain our world, I was never able to entirely let go of my belief that there was more to the world than inexorable laws of nature and the brute facts of descent with modification. Now, I thought with growing excitement, I was bearing witness to a truly unexplainable phenomenon. A visit from spirits from another world. proof that harsh materialism was not all there was. I wondered if the curious raiments worn by these spirits were the garments worn by all in the afterlife or from whatever mystical world they were from. I couldn't wait to compare notes with Emma. To tell Penelope that her long-discarded belief in fairies in the garden was not so childish after all. But where were Penelope and Emma? I frowned, momentarily confused. I couldn't remember where they were. Had they gone to the town for supplies? A trip to Boston for the newest scientific devices and literary works? To visit Emma's parents? My memory had been growing ever less reliable. I had begun to think often of my father, who, at a very young age, had begun to misplace his glasses, his pocket watch, and had quickly progressed to forgetting the face of his wife, and finally, before the end, the rudiments of reason entirely. He had died in confusion, a once sharp mind gone to rot and ruin. I realized I couldn't remember what I'd been doing before I dropped off to sleep by the well. I experienced a moment of panic before I shrugged it off. It wasn't unusual for me to get so wrapped up in my readings, in my work, that the days became a blur. If not for Miss Hartworth, on days when I was particularly seized by an idea or a new painting theory, I could go days without eating. Emma had probably come to me and told me where she and Penelope were going when I was in just such a state. I was sure we would laugh together about it later, she gently mocking my absent-mindedness, me ruefully agreeing. I quickly realized that the spirits could not see me or interact with me at all, that I was effectively invisible to them. I set about studying these beings, probing the boundaries, and testing their ability to interact with the corporal world. I would write it all down, and when Emma and Penelope returned, we could pore over the data and results together. I couldn't wait to see the joy on Emma's face when she realized what a discovery we'd made. The specters displayed an intense joviality and, sometimes shocking forthrightness. They spoke loudly and confidently, displayed little to no shame in wearing extraordinarily immodest clothing, and in deploying vulgarity. The children took the Lord's name in vain without reproach from their parents, something that I was sure would have sent Miss Hartworth into an apoplexy of indignation if she too had not disappeared somewhere. Although outwardly, they seemed infectiously happy, they often behaved in a strange manner that struck me as somewhat sad. The children appeared to disdain books or play, and would instead stare blankly for hours at strange items held in their hands or mounted on walls as if mesmerized. I wondered if they were communicating with the world they had exited through those devices, if they missed home or were perhaps exiles of some type. Their life seemed oddly sterile to me, with little in the way of tactile exploration or genuine engagement with the world. They only occasionally went outdoors where Emma, Penelope, and I spent most of our time laughing and playing together in the sunlight, and when they did, they quickly returned indoors. They spoke to each other infrequently, and floated through the hallways and rooms as if barely seeing them, as if they did not really exist in this world. I quickly realized that, while I could not interact with their incorporeal forms, they did seem to sense my presence. This effect appeared most prominent at night, a time when the lines between our worlds appeared most permeable. I realized they would often wake when I made noise at night. That if I stood nearby them while they slept, they would frequently stir as if aware of my presence, but unable to see me. I tried everything to communicate with them, to make them aware. Imagine the immensity of discovery, if we could find some way to communicate with this spirit world, if we could learn their secrets. I filled pages of my notebook with theories about these spectral beings. How they came here, why I could see them. It was all pure speculation, but immensely exciting. I slept less and less every night. My dreams were full of terrors. I would fall into dark places where great beasts cavorted and howled. The dreams faded rapidly in the daylight, and I would soon forget the content, but would awake in a cold sweat, fading images of broken bodies and dark graves filling my mind. I began having a recurring nightmare of drawing water from our well. The sky would grow black and I would continue pulling the rope, bringing the bucket to the rim, knowing something horrible would be inside but unable to stop. The bucket would slowly rise, and with horror I watched it appear, full of writhing white maggots rather than water. My feet, outside of my control, resisting every impulse, screaming at them to stop, would carry me to the edge of the well, and I would look down. Far below, gleaming faintly in the moonlight, I would see a small body in a bright flower-covered dress, broken and shattered and floating in the dark water. I would scream and awake. I wondered if the arrival of the spirits were causing the dream. I began to consider if I should attempt to remove these ghostly beings who had made my house their home. It was only later that I realized the spirits were afraid of me, that my attempts at contact had unnerved them. The night I realized this had begun like any other night. Once it was dark, I carefully walked up the stairs, laboriously carrying a heavy bucket filled with salt water. I planned to stand in the bucket and attempt to speak with the ghosts. I had been methodically testing different methods of communication, employing different combinations of chemicals and writing materials, keeping track of each experiment and the result in one of my many notebooks. I looked forward to presenting Emma with my research when she got home. I could see the amused smile that she would give me upon seeing my notes detailing the laborious data collection and exhaustive methodological notes. I could picture her leaning forward to kiss my forehead, her chuckle as she would say, "We'll make a positivist out of you yet, Mr. Thornton." I think any amount of work would be worth just one of those smiles from my Emma. One giggle from my little Penelope. The experimentation had not all been in vain. I knew that occasionally my attempts at communication could be seen by the ghosts the next day. I saw Ashley start in surprise once at a greeting I'd wrote using my mauve watercolors mixed with salt. Later, I'd watched her fiercely scrubbing away the words, locks of hair falling loose over her forehead and a grim look of determination on her face. While the attempt had not apparently spurred any desire in the spirits to communicate back, I knew now that it was possible. That night, rather than turning off the light and going to sleep, Ashley stood at the foot of the bed and said stiffly, "Jason, we need to talk." I looked at her closely and noticed that her face was drawn and pallid. Her eyes darted about in sharp, quick movements, and I realized she was afraid. Jason looked up at her warily, and I saw that there were dark bags under his eyes, that his fingernails were short, ragged, and bloody at the edges. He was afraid too. Kate said that he saw a little girl today. Ashley continued, speaking slowly and choosing her words carefully. He said she was wet and her dress was dripping. That she asked him to come play in the well. "Oh Jesus, Ash." Jason groaned. "You're not telling me you believe the stories about this place, are you?" He probably just had a bad dream. Likely caused by some subconscious suggestions due to tall tales from the kids at school. "You know they talk about this place." Mia said she saw the same thing. Only there was a woman with the girl, and she had a big red circle around her neck. Ashley's jaw was set and she was staring at Jason with determination. "Don't pretend you haven't noticed things too, Jason. That you haven't heard the noises. Seen the shadows move, noticed the messages. There is something wrong with this house." "Ashley," Jason began. He was speaking very calmly, but a vein in his neck was pulsing and I realized he was both very scared and very angry that he was scared. "Old houses make noise at night. Shadows move in the wind. This is all dash. Oh, give it a fucking rest," Ashley spoke with sharp venom. Don't pretend that coming here was about anything but gaining publicity for your second book. So you could move a couple thousand more copies. Here, Ashley began to move her hands as if laying out words in the air. From the twisted mind that brought you Death Train, comes an all-new spine-tingling horror story, written from within the bowels of the famous haunted Thornton Manor itself. Ashley Jason began again, but she overrode him, her voice rising to a pitch. I mean Jesus, Jason, a little girl died in that well. Her parents both killed themselves in this house. I don't know if what we're experiencing is real, or some type of shared breakdown, but it is not healthy. What, we stay here anyways, for some cheap publicity, for your fucking book. Jason began to reply, but I did not hear him. I could hear a crashing noise in my head, a churning sound like heavy storm-tossed surf beating against rocks. Memories began to flood my mind and then spill over. I see Penelope in her bright flower-covered dress, the sunlight caught in her hair, as she ran outside to play. I see Emma and I hours later, searching for her frantically in the fading twilight. I remember seeing the broken wooden cover of the well, the splintered boards jutting out like broken teeth. I see myself running toward the well, numb horror coursing through me. Looking down through the small ragged hole, I see a tiny broken body floating in the water far below, the yellow dress barely visible in the fading light. I see Emma and I standing next to a small grave long after everyone else has left, holding each other and staring at the freshly dug dirt. I see myself waking up alone in the pre-dawn darkness of our bed and reading the simple 8-word note Emma left me. I need to be with her. I'm sorry. I see myself running down the stairs, hoping I'm not too late, knowing I am. I see myself nearly blind with grief, walking to the oak tree that towers over the old well, a knotted rope trailing in my hand. I remember feeling sure as I did this, that there was no after death. That I almost certainly would not see Emma and Penelope again. That I would not open my eyes after this final act and be greeted by a green meadow in the midday sun. I would not find a moss-covered pathway and follow it to find Emma waiting for me beside the quiet burbling of a mountain stream, Penelope in her lap, a book in her hand, and a smile on her face. I knew that this world was a dark place ruled by chaos and unseen and uncaring natural laws. But I knew also that not living at all was better than living in a world without my Emma and Penelope. I remember a moment of weightlessness when I jumped, pain, fear, and then nothing. Nothing until I woke up on the moss beside the old well, hearing the visitors come up the walkway. I collapsed to my knees. I remembered everything now. Jason and Ashley were continuing to argue, their voices strident, but I couldn't hear them over the pounding in my head. It sounded as if they were coming from far away, as if I was underwater. I felt like the grief might kill me. I didn't move from the corner of the bedroom for 3 days. The sadness was debilitating and I felt as if I might go mad. Outside of my pain, I was dimly aware that the family in my house was disintegrating. I saw the young couple hold each other after their son was found in the well. The daughter was next, although I do not know how. At one point I heard the sound of a gunshot from the study where Jason had spent hours staring blankly into the distance. I watched as Ashley, her face streaked with tears, lay in the bed and swallowed one little white pill after another until she lay down and did not get back up. I could not make myself care. My life was empty and black. My heart was a howling wilderness, a desolate place with rain-splattered rocks and eternal night. I wandered the cavernous empty rooms and remembered when they were full of light and laughter. I discovered that there was more to this world than what we can see and feel in our living moments. But what lies beneath the veil is no more kind than the cruel laws of nature, written red in tooth and claw, that our scientists have uncovered. Something dark and unspeakable has stolen into this house. I don't know why I linger on where others have passed. But I can feel the festering malevolence growing in power as if each fresh tragedy gives it strength. I resolve to write my experiences down. To warn, to the extent that I am able, those who come after me. If you are reading this, flee this place. Something unspeakable and unknowable is here with me. As for me, I will not answer the call of the darkness that beckons. I will avoid the mouth of that cursed well, a mouth that looms large at night as if the maw of some creature beyond knowing. I do not know if you are out there, my dear Emma, my sweet Penelope, if you too are lost in the sea of time somewhere, anchored to this world by grief and a refusal to let go. But I am here. I will continue to write my warnings by any means I can contrive. I will wait until the sun grows large, the seas boil, and the universe dies. I will wait forever for you, my loves. Wow. Just wow. This is some wild stuff, right? I found these pages stuffed into a nightstand on my first day here. While the serious, scientific community refuses to recognize the truth about this place, I am hopeful that my fellow believers scattered across the web will help me uncover the reality. I've only been here a few days, but already I can tell that there is something powerful here. I'll keep posting as I find more. I will admit that this place is seriously spooky, but I've done my research on precautions and am taking all the steps advised on YouTube and Reddit forums. So far I feel fine, other than a few bouts of sleepwalking, nothing out of the ordinary. I just need to fix the cover of that well outside. It keeps clattering in the wind.